Hello, everybody in the room and outside the room. I guess everyone has arrived to join our conference. A warm welcome to all the participants, to everybody who will be part of the discussion and who will be listening to it. I want to start the conference with a little story. I remember pretty well some years ago in 2017, I was joining a conference in Frankfurt, and this was the first conference that I can remember where people from the banking sector, from economic science and from ecological science came together. And I had the impression that everyone was pretty much smelling and tasting who were the other ones, and that they tried to find language for the purpose of greening the financial system. And a few years later, very recently, I joined a summit here in Frankfurt again, and there were two employees from the Deutsche Bank, and they were talking about biodiversity, and I had pretty much the impression that I was in a room with ecological economists that I knew from my scientific background very well, because they used some of these terms that I've been using for decades, and was really amazed how much this discussion had changed. I think we see it everywhere now. We see it in the regulation, we see it in political discussions, we see it in international debates, and this is what we would like to talk about today. And we will have two panel discussions that are all around biodiversity and the whole pathway towards sustainability in the financial sector. But first of all, we will have a welcoming speech by Volker Mosbrugger, who is the host of this event today. Volker Mosbrugger has been within this debate for more than, let's say, 40 years now. He has been a student in Freiburg and Montpellier, and then has been a scientist, a paleontologist in Freiburg and Bonn as well. Has then had has been a professor in the University of Tübingen, came here for the Senckenberg Gesellschaft, and since he is not part of the Senckenberg Gesellschaft anymore, he is the president of the Polytechnical Gesellschaft here in Frankfurt, which is debating very many issues around societal topics. So he will be the first one, and afterwards, for just making that a bit short, Bernd Hansjürgens will be the second one to have the keynote about key challenges in sustainable finance, an introduction to the discussions that we will have later. And he has been within the discussion, the environmental discussion, for many decades as well, has been at Marburg. We were talking about environmental taxes that you were discussing already 20, 30 years ago, and then joined the UFZ in Leipzig in the 2010s, and we'll have then the keynote afterwards, but first it's your stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. So it's my pleasure to welcome you in this wonderful setting. I can say that because I'm no longer the director general of this institution, but I may say this is the hub for biodiversity research. So feel happy and well accepted here. At the moment, I am the speaker of a research initiative that is called FEdA, and I will later just introduce you a bit to this FEdA research initiative that is about biodiversity. And as you know, this event is actually organized by FEdA and UFZ, and Bernd Hansjürgens will give a brief introduction later on, and then the Leibniz Institution SAFE. And these three are actually organizing this meeting. I can move on here. And I would like to start just to emphasize that when we talk about climate change and biodiversity, we actually should keep in mind that we should actually talk about natural capital. It's not just about climate, and it's not just about biodiversity, it's also about water, and it's about soil and rocks. And you all know that with all these 4 types of natural capital, we have major critical events happening. Climate change is most known and addressed, but then we have all the topics of pollution, also plastics in the ocean, ice melt, we have soil and rocks, the erosion phenomenon of soils, overuse in many places, and then of course life biodiversity loss, serious issue. And I would also like to emphasize that all these systems are closely linked: air, water, soil, and life. So whatever you do in soil has an impact on air, has an impact on water, has an impact on life, and vice versa. When you look at biodiversity, for instance, so we say these are the major primary drivers of climate change: land, sea use change, direct exploitation, climate, what are the major drivers? Sorry, I was wrong. The major drivers of biodiversity loss are land, sea use change, direct exploitation, climate change, pollution, invasive alien species, and some others. So you see, climate change is not the most serious challenge for biodiversity. It's primarily land use change. So, but in fact, it also means whatever you do to change the effect of climate change has a positive effect on biodiversity. And this is not true vice versa. Whatever you do for climate change and to protect it may not necessarily help biodiversity, but whatever you do for biodiversity actually helps climate change, tries to stop climate change. So this is an important issue for me, that we do not focus only on one sector alone, be it the air, the climate system, or biodiversity, but actually we should keep nature as a total system in the focus. Biodiversity, let me say a few words about the serious problems of biodiversity loss. I mean, most people think biodiversity is not so important, but we know it is important also in economy. Many people say, okay, this may be true, that biodiversity is important for economy, but this is not the only reason why we want to protect biodiversity. I accept this, but for the time being here, I would argue primarily on the economic scale. We know that something like 50% of the global GDP depend in some respect on biodiversity, and we know that the economic value of all the ecosystem services provided by ecosystem services, nowadays we call these nature's contribution to people. So the total value, economic value of nature's contribution to people is around 150 to 200 trillion dollars per year. And here you see a phenomenon that we observed in Germany. So the decline in biodiversity is very serious, not only in the tropics, but also in Europe. Here you see a study that was done between 2008 and 2017. And in these 10 years in the grassland, we observed a reduction of species richness by 34%, just in 10 years. And more or less, the same is true for forest, and if you go to the decline in numbers of individuals, in 10 years we lost in the grassland 78% of all the arthropods that occurred previously in these grasslands, or 70% of individuals in the forest. So biodiversity loss is a global phenomenon. Of course, it's most serious in the tropics, but it's still very, very serious problems also in Europe. And for that reason, the Ministry of Science and Education in Germany has started a major research initiative that is called Research Initiative for the Conservation of Biodiversity. The acronym is FEdA, Forschungsinitiative zum Erhalt der Artenvielfalt. And the challenge for this research initiative is to find ways how we can reverse the trend in biodiversity loss. And this is meant to be a contribution to the national biodiversity strategy. It's meant to be a contribution to the EU biodiversity strategy and the Green Deal. and of course also to the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. You know, we had this conference in Montreal and then in Cali, and so we have a number of challenges to face in what concerns the 2020 global biodiversity framework. So we have three different fields of research. One is focusing on assessing biodiversity. What could be better techniques to assess biodiversity? And we will later hear about some of these techniques. Then the second topic is understanding the system, the interconnections between the different fields that exist, water, air, and so on, but also humans and human interaction with nature. And finally, to find system solutions. What do we mean by system solutions? This simply means it is not enough to find a solution how we can protect biodiversity or preserve biodiversity. We need to find a solution that also satisfies the society and the economy. This we would call a system solution. So this is a challenge. You have to talk with all the stakeholders. It's not just about the best way to protect biodiversity, it's about the best way to protect biodiversity and satisfy the needs of the society and the needs of the economy. So really a big challenge. We had so far 3 funding guidelines, calls for projects. Actually, we have 39 projects running with a total volume of about 200 million euros for 5 years, so about 40 million euros per year. You can see more than 105 institutions that you can see here, all in Germany, included, and more than 300 people are working actually within this research program. A particular call that is interesting here in this context of this meeting here is biodiversity. This was a call where we asked for projects that try to find ways how we can value biodiversity, and evaluation of biodiversity in different contexts, valuing biodiversity for society, but also for the economy, and of course also in the context of ecosystems. So valuing biodiversity in these 3 components: natural capital, produced capital, and human capital, if you like. And I show you just 4 projects that are running or just are ending now, or have already ended within FEdA that concern the link between biodiversity and economy. One is biomod up here. There it's about how can nature, not just climate or biodiversity, be integrated into economic reporting. Another one is about impacts of food production, and in particular how we can include the natural impact of food production in a life cycle assessment. Then Humabile is a project that calculates true cost for food production, and here value gaps. And some of you are, of course, involved in all these 4 projects. It addresses the question, what are the biggest information gaps and uncertainties that we have so far, and what would be key parameters for valuing natural capitals in a scalable and transferable way. So these are 4 major projects that actually address the topics we are focusing on also here in this event. Okay, that's about all I wanted to tell you as a brief introduction. Let me emphasize again, I think it is very important, of course, that we address the topic of climate change and biodiversity. Maybe these are the 2 most important issues, but let's keep in mind we have to deal actually with natural capital, include not only climate and biodiversity, but also the soils and the humans and the entire global system. Thank you very much, and now I hand over to Bernd Hansjürgens, who will give you a further introduction into the topic today.
Thank you, Volker, for the warm welcome to all of us. So I do not really give a key lecture, I just give a few introductory words. And I want to focus on only three major sentences. Three major sentences. The first one, why should we act now? Why do we have this meeting here now and today? Why shouldn't we wait? Three reasons. The first reason, nature cannot wait. Nature cannot wait means, of course, we have a crisis in nature. We do not really know, we do not have full information about the planetary boundaries or something like this. So we do not have concrete evidence, but we have increasingly the feeling, we see it, that there is a danger for nature. First reason. Second reason, business cannot wait. Yeah? Because the business sector has to take into account the impacts, so the risks. Many risks are environmental risks, first of all, but many of these risks are also important for the business sector. So simultaneously for the environment and for the business sector. And this risk perspective is important for the companies, but also the impact perspective is important. And here we can also not wait, because it means, especially the banking sector, needs to know what the impacts of individual activities, and I mean companies' activities, on the environment and on nature is. So these two perspectives are important, and business cannot wait. Third reason, regulation is critical, and regulation is in a fast process of getting more importance. We all know that there's the European level, the CSRD, the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive, but there are many, many other activities. And all these activities are relatively young. When I say young, I mean 2 years old, 3 or 4 years old. And it's not only the European level, it's private initiatives, it's the private banking sector, but also associations, private associations, who are increasingly aware of this perspective and who get active now. So these are the 3 points of access here: the nature perspective, the business perspective, and the regulatory perspective. And so in one sentence, we feel that there is a need for action. We see that things are ongoing, but action does not take place. We do not see real action for different reasons. Maybe the scientific basis is not sufficiently elaborated. Maybe the private sector is hesitant. The information is not sufficient. The question is the environmental risk significant for my business? Is it not? Many say it's not, although they are in the middle, in the focus of the biodiversity and nature crisis. So and here our workshop comes into play. We ask, what's next for nature and sustainable finance? That's the title of the workshop. And we want to use the opportunity to exchange on these issues, these 3 issues. We want to ask where we stand, where we go with respect to information and reporting, because reporting information is one of the foci, but also with respect to decision making. And as you'll see from the program, we have more or less 2 major blocks today. The first block, more addressing some basic or fundamental issues, the relationships between nature and finance. And the second sector, much more coming from the practitioner side, from the business side, asking, hey, how can we implement this? What do we need? What are the next steps that have to be taken, etc. So the idea today is to have short presentations, not full lectures of 45 minutes each, but more impulses from different perspectives. And on this basis, we will have a joint discussion on the issues. And with this, I say welcome. Also, like Volker, welcome to all of you. And I hand over to you, Mr. Krohn, as our moderator. Thank you very much.
And I would now ask you to do the first presentation, which is, and this Johannes Förster, who's also part of the UFZ in Leipzig and also a member of the Value Balancing Alliance. And I hand over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, Philipp Krohn mentioned that too many presentations make people asleep, so I hope you will wake up now because it's about the essence, why we are here, and basically as the IPCC and the IPBES, both the authorities and science say climate and biodiversity is intricately, is linked, and actually we are all operating in the same system, so nature, people, economy, financial system actually is one ecosystem. And this we have to really integrate into our thinking and decision making, because at landscape level it's really all connected, and of course also at global level. And bringing an example, so for example in the regulation it says you should assess impacts that are happening on biodiversity sensitive areas and threatened species. That's part of the CSRD reporting. Then also the SFDR is asking for how your investment is impacting negatively biodiversity sensitive areas. Well, if we go to mining activities, for example in Africa, we know where the mines are located. We know also which of those mines are designated to be mined within the next 10, 20 years. And if you overlay this with the impact radius of 10 kilometers direct impacts, 50 kilometers indirect impacts, and combine it with the knowledge about species, how they behave, how they move, we will see that with the current already commissioned activities in the mining sector for Africa, we see that 80% of population the monkey populations, ape populations in West Africa are impacted negatively and under threat. Around 30% in Central Africa and around 60% in Eastern Africa. And this is what we already are committed to. So when we negotiate at international level about halting biodiversity loss by 2030, we have to get also honest. Already what is committed as investments is having these significant impacts. And these are resources we actually need also for the transition, for getting the renewable energy system up and running. So we are a bit in a trap actually. We are committed already to significant biodiversity loss with the actions that have been already taken. And then if you look at how dependencies of investments on nature look like. Well, if you're invested in an operation that is producing, a factory that is producing parts for manufacturing for vehicles, for example, for cars, and then you're getting hit by a flood, you might lose that production site. Okay, maybe 20, 30 million gone. Okay, but then if this small part is missing in your supply chain, the impact is actually around $500 million for that production manufacturer of cars. So that is actually the bigger risk. Is not the impact on that particular site, it's the risk in the supply chain and all the cascades that follow. Oh, sorry. Yes. And now the last point I want to make, of course there are also nature positive investments, and these are the ones we want to thrive for and we want to actually enhance. And this is an example from New York where a lot of the original infrastructure was of course paved walkways, and then they came across, well, with all the runoff we have from there, we have to increase the sewage system and the drainage system significantly in order to cope with all the rainwater that is washing from these sealed soils. Now they tested also an approach to have green infrastructure which is taking up the water and is where the infiltration is enhanced. And actually that system is cheaper to implement than expanding the existing infrastructure to take up more water. So by integrating this green system, the saving are up to 1.5 billion for the infrastructure development in New York. And on top of it, you get a lot of additional value from these ecosystems in terms of CO2 sequestration, air quality. So overall, it's actually economically beneficial to go for this combination of green and gray infrastructure. And these are, of course, the options we should aim for. Thank you.
So this second presentation will be by Gerrit von Zedlitz, University of Mannheim.
Yeah, welcome from my side as well. I'm Gerrit von Zedlitz, a PhD researcher in accounting on sustainability reporting at the University of Mannheim. And I actually attended here in Frankfurt 2 years ago a conference on biodiversity and standard setting. And the elephant in the room was, what are companies actually doing currently? And this sparked then my interest to basically have a very systematic look at that and what is currently driving this kind of reporting. And I had a look basically at all the large European firms and in a very systematic manner, and taking basically the main reporting framework. They have different disclosure recommendation, and then for each company in each year looking what do they actually report and what do they not report. And I wanted to bring you my main takeaways from that to know where we start from. And the first takeaway for me was that there is quite some increase in this reporting over time. And just in 2 years, I noticed that there were like 63% more disclosure items being disclosed just on biodiversity. However, when we see the benchmark here is all recommendations are being disclosed, one that we are quite far away from that still, although there's this development. In the second step, I then looked at who is actually reporting that, and I quickly noticed that there is quite a jump when I'm comparing high-risk industry firms from low-risk industry firms and seeing that basically the first ones, they're reporting almost 3 times as much as the low-risk firms, and that particularly the low-risk firms are the ones that are driving basically those increases in the reporting. Those are the 2 takeaways. My third takeaway was then looking rather in the content of the reporting. Of course, that could be maybe boilerplate language, that could be something that is more substantive. So it might make sense to have a closer look at what is actually reported. And those biodiversity frameworks, they actually break it up and look at, are they disclosures related to the governance structures? Are they related to the strategy? Are they metrics, so quantitative information? And what I quickly noticed here as well is that the early reporters, so those high-risk companies, are primarily advancing at the more advanced dimensions, so governance, for example, or forming targets, while all these these new reporters are actually more on this qualitative dimensions, so reporting on strategy matters or some boilerplate risk management matters. And if in a fourth step, I thought then, okay, what could be another good benchmark? And I quickly thought, okay, climate reporting could maybe be a benchmark to compare it to. And there's actually a similar framework that is from a similar organization and taking very similar disclosure recommendations, so it's quite nice to compare it. And what I quickly noticed here is we see this level jump for climate reporting, so there's much more being disclosed for climate than there is for biodiversity. And I want to quickly highlight also those 2 lines here. This is metrics and targets, and they are quite high on the climate dimension, but they are very low on the biodiversity dimension. And what is driving that? Well, it's very heterogeneous, so there are companies that do that out of publicity, there are companies that do that out of actual risks, some that are more aware of it, and if you want to dig deeper into that, I have a QR code here for the full study, but I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
And the third person, Tobias Wildner, and you have said as well.
Yeah, thank you very much also for inviting me. What I will do now in this very brief input, I'll give you first an aspect of what should nature reporting look like to be meaningful, so what should it focus on. This is based on a big stakeholder engagement process we did with all these stakeholders, so from companies over to all the auditing firms, the big one, to NGOs, to science. So what should nature reporting under CSRD, TNFD, all the abbreviation look like? Key aspects. And the second part is, how do we actually put this data into practice and use it for decision making? So this is my second part, which is then Koyua, the startup I run. How do we use this with companies? So what did we find with this big stakeholder engagement project that we ran together with the Umweltstiftung Michael Otto? Few aspects, I only mentioned the big one. Reporting, and this is in general, should be a very structured, streamlined process, and the materiality assessment, you see this at the beginning, is actually at the heart of it. So as good as your materiality assessment is, as good can your reporting be. If your materiality assessment is not that good and not that detailed, your reporting will exactly be the same. But what are the 4 key aspects of nature reporting? First of all, you should consider nature not as biodiversity, but nature is much, much more. So the reporting, what is meant by it is nature reporting and not biodiversity reporting. So it's not just about the bees and the polar bears, it's much, much more, and we heard about this from Professor Mosbrugger before. The second, I think most of you know it, location matters. This is true for nature. Not for climate so much, but for nature, for biodiversity, location matters. Other one, this is a more technical one. You should look at the cross and the net, so at your impacts and dependencies before you implemented actions and then afterwards. And then the other one, it should be transparent and objective. So what we found is there is enough data there, publicly available. Use that data to really have an objective, transparent reporting. And I just focus a little bit more on the 2 most important parts. So the first one, get the definition right. So what we found is that most people really don't get the true definition of what means nature reporting. So again, it's not this just species, not the protected areas. It's all of what you can see here. Climate change, land use, the driver, ecosystem services, dependencies, and so forth. And the second one, location, location, location. So if you do nature reporting and you don't do it at a location level, it will not be meaningful for financial markets or for business decision making. This is just not possible for nature. So how can you put this into practice? Again, Koyua is a Hamburg-based startup, and we work with a few getting bigger clients. And how do we put this nature? So the intent is that we get this reporting data. Yes, we can do reporting, we can do the compliance, but then how can you use this data to actually make decisions? And I give you a brief example of a big infrastructure project we assessed for a big German conglomerate that is building infrastructure projects. So again, the intent is to leverage compliance data to really make proper decisions, sustainable decisions. So you run your nature analysis, you also run your climate analysis. This is all the data you get from reporting. You have this anyway. Okay, sorry. If you bring these together, you can really identify the hotspots, the location, again on location level, where does nature and climate interact, and where does it intersect, and where should you focus on? So this is one part, and all this data you will have from your reporting. And then the second part, if you bring this together, you can actually make informed decision. So in this case, you can really say, okay, so I should maybe change my project in certain aspects in a certain way, which usually doesn't cost much money, just to take care of nature and climate at the same time. And this is one benefit, as Mr. Mosbrugger said, if you look at nature more than at biodiversity, so you consider climate, you consider pollution, climate risks, then you can really put this reporting data, this compliance burden into action and really make better decisions with it.
Okay, now we have all the panelists, so there are 2 missing, and you will be the first 2 who will catch a question by me. Please come here. So as I already introduced you, Carola Menzel, I pretty much like this term of the elephant in the room. you can already serve yourselves with the microphones if you like. And there is another elephant in the room, I would say, that when I talk to economic scientists and we're talking about climate change and sustainability, they always say climate change is analytically pretty easy to solve, because you just have to put a cap on everything and lower the cap each period, and then at one time there will be zero emissions, and then you'll automatically have a price on it. This is not the case for biodiversity. So what would be the motivation for companies to get along with this elephant in the room problem, to do reporting and to be informed and transparent?
It's a question for me, I guess. You look at me, the
Yes,
elephant in the room, hopefully not. I guess there are many drivers, to be honest. We cannot just look into one of it. Honestly, I'm actually representing an organization looking more into the financial sector. And here we are also looking into various drivers for looking into nature-related solutions. And on one hand, we have heard it already earlier, it's a regulation. These are one of the strongest drivers for the financial sector, but also for the real economy sector players to act on it. And there are many solutions available. When we think about the financial sector, there's actual supervisory agencies that can provide the guidance. That starts with this part, not just requiring and requesting, but providing the guidance how to do it. That's the first thing to do. The data, obviously, getting access to it. This is one of the critical things they need, on one hand, the financial institutions, but also the real economy sector players. And we also have other drivers, right? The real economy sector players can, as it was also mentioned, think about the risks and opportunity they can actually exploit by looking into nature-related solutions. And it's saving costs at the end if they're doing it right. And these are the drivers they should look into, but yeah, it's not easy.
Florian, here you are part of the SAFE Institute here in Frankfurt. As there are no prices yet for nature use, for nature services, what would be the incentive to act in a biodiversity-friendly way for companies?
No, that's a very good question, right? I mean, you mentioned climate change before, right? If you would have a price on carbon, of course, companies would act. But we don't have a price on carbon. We may be far away from having a price on biodiversity. So I think there's a lot of, discussion to distinguish, as you mentioned before, biodiversity impacts and biodiversity risks. And I feel companies have a very inherent motivation, or should have at least, to incorporate biodiversity risks. So, there's a lot of research going on. I think we're getting better at measuring that. But I'm not worried that firms will not be able to measure the risk. I'm more worried about the impacts. So how can we encourage firms to reduce their footprint, right? That's not the same thing as reducing their risk exposure. And I think that's at least my field of research. There's a huge demand from consumers, but also from investors for green investment products. And this demand is mainly driven by the demand for having a positive, making a positive contribution to improve the world. But their challenge is connecting the demand from investors and consumers to companies that actually improve their impact and not just their risks. And I think there's a lot of need to better connect these two dots. So we need better reporting of impact. And I think that the upcoming disclosure regulation helps a lot, but disclosure is not yet improvement of impact. I think that's clearly not the same. But then also we need to integrate these numbers into the frameworks that help end investors to choose companies that really fits their non-financial preferences. I think there's a lot of work today. There's the SFDR, but looking at how it's implemented, I think we have a lot of work to do to really make that happen.
So, Gerrit von Zedlitz, as you were introducing this term of the elephant in the room, I would like to ask you, what could play the role of the CO2 price within this framework of biodiversity regulation?
So I think the complicated part about biodiversity is that it's some sort of multidimensional, it's difficult to quantify, so it's difficult to put a price directly on it. And I think this is at least where we come in from an accounting perspective and think about whether information itself could already be maybe some sort of instrument, because you make companies report on it, and if they need to report on it, they might then need to adjust their behavior. However, of course, that's a quite complex causal chain that you're imposing on that. You need some stakeholders understanding what is being reported. You need some stakeholders reacting to that. And maybe it's the best we have, because there is no technical or better technical solution or political solution, but that's at least how we as accountants look at that.
Johannes Förster, the projects you were mentioning in your presentation, they are pretty much like a social value. So can a social value and a private value for companies match?
Well, there is actually a price on nature, and a price we are paying every day. And if you look at the prices of cocoa having quadrupled in the last 2 years, the same with olive oil, for example, and these are indications where actually climate events, weather events enhanced by climate change, impact the production systems. And if you look at cocoa farming and olive oil farming, or olive trees, they are trees. They are not, you cannot regrow them the next year. So these are established systems, and when they get hit by these events, and also if the production conditions are not right, you are losing production. And it's actually, these are very sensitive systems. You cannot easily replace them. And then if we see this several years in a row, you see prices going up, driving inflation. So we are paying this price on the loss of nature already every day. And we are paying it also, for example, when we have events like these extreme events, or if you look at Valencia, for example, we have paved everything there, and then you get these, the ecosystems don't have the capacity to take up the water. It's not that if the ecosystem would totally, completely prevent this from happening, but the magnitudes would be lower. And we see examples where actually if you work with nature, you do restoration activities in these river systems, the peaks get lower, and with this also premiums by insurance companies are actually being lowered. There are cases so that you are actually paying a lower price if you allow nature to do the job. And these are real prices we are paying. And of course, there are also the prices like maybe nicer views of the landscape, or also all these intrinsic values of nature, which we might not have paying like a price for that, but which are also of critical social importance. So yes, there is not one value as for the CO2 price, but there are multiple values, and we have to work with them.
So Tobias Wildner, what prevents companies from reporting well? Is it the complexity of the problem? Is it the regulation? How far have we come with regulation? What would you say?
I think, and that's also what we see from clients now, is that people don't really understand what is really meant by biodiversity in nature. So most of them really think, okay, this is the protected area, this is the threatened species, this is this thing, and obviously quite naturally they ask, okay, so what does that have to do with me and myself? And we don't see this so much changing with reporting at the moment, because I think also the auditing firm support sometimes this narrow focus. But what's quite interesting also from the financial sector is, as was mentioned here, the actual dependencies. So that you actually, every company, every business model is really dependent on nature. And if you look at this together with climate change, and for example, you have a location where it is projected that you have big climate risks, and you can already see that nature is weakened, so you're losing your pest protection against these coming climate dangers, then it's much easier for to explain to companies that this is an issue, this is a nature issue, and the best solution you can have, and this is then an opportunity that you use nature, you support nature, because it's the best protection to protect you from climate change. So long story short, I think, or what we find is, it's a very promising idea to bring those two together, to see climate change and nature loss as one, and then focus on those locations or those areas where both actually are very prominent.
But that means you already have clients and projects where you can help companies to better understand what the values are that are in danger.
Yes, the one that I showed is a multi-billion dollar project, and there's enough data there. So you have the climate models can tell you in 2035, 2050, under these scenarios you will have increase in heat waves, all of this. There's enough data to say that you're losing nature, so the thing that protects you from heat waves, that keeps water in the ground, that actually supports your location, your building site, your warehouse or whatever, you are losing it already. And this is much easier to explain because you can talk in a more business context, in a more risk context. Why would you destroy something that you get for free, that protects you from something you know is coming? It's a bit easier than just to go over the impact side and say there is a threatened mouse living next door. It's harder than to explain this, I would say.
Yeah. Carola Menzel, we have seen a lot of international initiatives to improve reporting. The International Sustainable Standard Board is one example. What would you say, how much will it help to have internationalized standards to these difficult issues?
I guess it will help, considering that we are a very globalized world and all the countries, at least we are also working in where I'm engaged, most of the economic sectors are at some point directly or indirectly connected to the global world, and then these standards make sense and they are required, so it definitely makes sense. And also the regulators are looking into that direction. They take that on board and also replicate it as much as possible, yeah. Definitely.
But we have a very difficult discussion on metrics because, as we said, there's not one harmonized bad that we should deal with. So how can we find solutions into this metrics discussion?
Not sure whether I'm the right person for that, actually.
Is there
I'm not
anyone
that
on the stage?
in the matrix, but I would rather also go beyond that. You heard about the challenges of data gathering, but when we are on the stage of data gathering, what we are doing then, do we already have the business cases that justify to be really nature related and that make really economic sense for the businesses, except of the New York case that we had just heard earlier? Are there really interesting business models that can be also brought forward to the financial sector, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, you can catch up on that if you like.
Sorry for pointing to you.
I think finding business cases or business opportunities or really nature-focused business opportunities is a little bit more trickier for me because my background is in investment banking and risk management, actually. For me, it's more the risk side. I really think that there's a big elephant, a big risk that is overlooked. So for me, it's more the risk management side. I would like to know as an investor, as a bank doing due diligence, does my company have locations in areas where nature is lost, climate change is coming, and they might not do business there in the next 5 or 10 years, and they just simply go bust. So this is where I would come in and say, and there's enough data there to at least get a better understanding, because due diligence is not about putting a concrete value, a monetary or any value on something. Like most risks, the complex risks are qualitatively looked at least at the beginning. And I think there's enough data there to do this and to figure out where the locations are you maybe should not do business anymore.
Florian, what is the task? I mean, we make incomparable elements comparable, and we have companies that have completely different exposures, and they should be transparent on their risks, while the risks are completely different. So how do we deal with that? It's a very, very, very complex task.
It's super complex, and I think we need to ask what's the objective you want to reach, right? I think if you look at specific companies, biodiversity risks are highly industry and company specific. So if you're a financial analyst or even a company executive, I'm not so sure how much you will benefit from aggregated indicators that try to take all this dimension, weight them, combine them. But I think you need to have more in-depth knowledge and what's actually going on in a specific company. Maybe also connecting to what Johannes just said on the price. I mean, we pay, right? So we obviously pay a huge price already now for biodiversity loss, for climate change. But I think the key challenge is that it's not the same entities that cause like these damages and then pay the price. So we have a classical common pool problem. We have that in climate change, making some advances. We have it in biodiversity and nature more broadly. And I think that's the key challenge, right? How do we make these entities pay that cause or put this price on the rest of society? And I think, as Gerrit mentioned, one way of thought is to have more disclosure, right? So we force companies to report the damage they do and hope that somehow markets will solve and stakeholders will solve. But I'm a bit critical on this narrative. So I think in many respects we need tougher regulation, but we have limited political capacity to implement that. So I think it's always a balance, right? How much do we trust markets to solve? How much can we actually use political capital to make regulations?
Yeah, but there's another part in your answer. I mean, what will the agents have as interests into the regulation and reporting? And I just would, Gerrit von Zedlitz, I would like to ask you, if I was a financial analyst, I would be happy to have very, very short and very easy ways to see my exposure. Is that just a wish, or is it possible?
Well, I think it exactly shows the problem that maybe disclosure is some sort of a difficult way to solve this as well, because you have those expectations to aggregate it in a very short form. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have the solution to the problem at all, but at least I think settings like this could be a way to solve it, because I feel like we have different scientific fields that intersect, but they don't normally talk much with each other, and we don't know much about, at least from the economist and financial side, what like the valid and the reliable metrics would be. And maybe on the other side, natural sciences, the business link is missing, because in the end we want to have metrics that are directly linked to companies. We don't want some aggregate figures, because otherwise it will be difficult to trace this kind of dependencies and risk.
I think we can learn also a bit to what has happened in the ESG domain, right? Which is also, like nature and biodiversity, a very broad term that has many aspects. Nobody really knows how to measure it. Some rating agency aggregate it. But if you look at what financial analysts are doing, they don't use these ratings at face value. They maybe use them to kind of like do some heat mapping, which companies could be exposed, but then on a company level, you need to be way more granular and way more specific what this company does. And I think it's also important to see, exactly, financial analysts may also, a company could just exploit nature capital and be profitable because of that. So an analyst may not see that as negative. I think it's always connected. Is this exploitation to be critical in the view of upcoming legislation or reputation, or is it simply profitable, right? That's the sad truth that on the short term exploiting nature can be very profitable. And I think having more transparency on the biodiversity impacts and putting a highlight on this exploitation may help to build some stakeholder pressure. But that's my question. How far will that bring us? I don't know.
Johannes Förster, please.
You put it rightly that nature is a common good. A lot of aspects of nature are characterized that they are not easily can be compartmentalized, so that looking at it in compartments. And also the image I have shown in the beginning of my introduction, where everything is connected. And this is, we have to get from metrics, from seeing them as single data points, to putting them into a systems perspective, how they are interacting and how we interact with nature. And so that companies operating at different sites have to look into the entire ecosystem they are operating in, including the other stakeholders. So, for example, when we think of the Science-Based Target Network with the SBTN targets, there is one also on engagement, simply because if you want to set targets for nature and for example, to reduce your land use footprint or to enhance water quality, you need to interact and get engaged with other actors that use the same resource. And these challenges will enhance if we want to get on a more sustainable, transformative direction and transformation path. I think collaboration is a key. And we have to overcome just looking what's in it for me into, okay, what is in it as a shared profit? Not only what's in it for me, but we need to manage nature as a system and us being part also of that system.
Let's elaborate a little bit on this issue, but a bit further. If I see the most rich ecosystems in the world, they will be in the global south, but the richest companies will be in the global north and have no direct linkage to these biospheres. So how can they be made responsible for these ecosystems that are endangered?
Well, that is what the CSRD is addressing and SFDR is addressing. So I think this is one component of that. So that's why also kind of like these tools help to locate across your supply chain to see, okay, it's not only at your own location, but these impacts and dependencies can be on entirely different continents and still you will be able to address and assess them.
So you were talking about investment banking, or you can also say something to that. But
yeah, maybe just one thing, and that what we also see, one of the biggest hurdles, funnily, is the transparency on location data. So it's true that in the value chain you have your biggest impacts on biodiversity. I mean, we had a lot of biodiversity at some point here as well. It's just gone and we got used to it, and now it's left in the global south. But also what we see, and it's fine, you have tools and tools can automatically assess this, but if you don't even know the location, like if you don't know where your supplier is, you only have the address of the headquarter, that's actually one of the biggest hurdles, not just for nature, but then also for climate change, for all the other things, for the social aspects. So one of the biggest steps would be transparency in your value chain, but also from a financial perspective. I'm not sure if I would want to invest in a big corporation that doesn't even know where the suppliers are. It doesn't need to know it exactly, maybe every little supply chain, but the key supply chain, you maybe should know where your locations are. And if they are then in an area where nature is rich and gives you a lot for free, that might be something you might want to look at in a little bit further. But this is standard financial due diligence. There's nothing specific to nature.
So would that mean that all your investment bankers from your background that you were mentioning do understand the logic of this reporting?
I would hope that if they understand that they are really dependent on something, then of course they would understand this. Like maybe that's a good thing. If you tell them there is a risk, they will try to find, like markets will search for the risk and try to assess it. The issue we might have here is that there are huge risks, but no one is really aware of. And when I started at Goldman, it was after the financial crisis. There were some huge risks in the financial systems that no one was really aware of, and suddenly they came knocking.
And so everyone said, why didn't we have any hints on that?
Exactly, so maybe that's why transparency is not so bad after all.
But the main critique, Carola Menzel, on CSRD and other regulations is that it's like more of an over-regulation. And I'm wondering if there's some truth in it, because there's so many data points that are asked for. So how to answer to those who have this critical view on CSRD?
Yeah, I can just agree to what you just said. It's quite a lot to report on, yeah, no doubt. But at the end, it also helps, right? We just have to be real on that one. It is an effort for all of us, the companies, financial institutions, to absorb and to incorporate that in our processes. But at the end, it's an added value to have the data to identify the risks and the opportunities. So
but it would help sometimes to have a more focused approach and less data than needed.
I guess for each company, they have to decide themselves where do they start and what else can they then progress in a later stage. To start with the low-hanging fruits again of data access and then see how far you can go the next stage. I say it's the only realistic way of going forward, I would say.
When I gave my introduction to the conference, I was talking about a conference back in 2017 and the different languages that everyone was talking. What do you think? Are we closer to each other, like 7 years later?
I think just from a personal experience perspective, yes. I mean, when I initially studied environmental sciences, I worked in the sustainability industry and then did a PhD in financial economics. Like 10 years ago, these were separate worlds, but at least in the financial industry, I feel there has been a lot of movement of people moving in from environmental fields into finance. I think by now there's even a movement back then that many financial professionals have some degree of sustainability education. I think people are, the dialogue is getting better and better, certainly. But the question still, I mean, where do we head? I mean, is that enough, right?
And still, I mean, less understanding in some companies what they are doing there, and they're just like, within my newspaper, I can say that there are interviews of CEOs of mid-sized companies saying this all is trash. Why do we do that?
So kind of, so they don't think it's relevant. No, I mean, is it for them in a financial sense relevant or not? I mean, that's a question they need to answer, right? It's only then relevant if there is enough pressure or if customers reward, right, good behavior, right, or if regulation. So I think that connects back to the point: how can we make companies responsible for their impact if we don't have stringent legislation or that can put a price on it? I mean, you mentioned, for example, the SFDR. I think, of course, that was the underlying story, right? If we inform investors on, for example, the biodiversity impact, right, this will shift money to firms that really, I mean, improve on their biodiversity impact. But is it really working? So just one anecdote, there is a study by colleagues at the University of St. Gallen. They looked at cross-border investments of Swiss banks. So they fall under the SFDR. And so now with the MiFID II amendment, advisors are required to ask their clients about their sustainability preferences. But what they find is that only 5% of clients have ticked this box. Yes, I want a sustainable investment. But if you look at the portfolios of these same clients, they maybe have a sustainable investment share of 50%. So it seems that somehow the advisors go in and tell their clients, you better not tick this box, right? It will just restrict your universe of investments. I can offer you sustainable option also if you don't tick this. So I think this well-intended regulation doesn't seem to work as it was intended. So I think finding regulation that really connects the demand, a very fuzzy and general demand for greenness or biodiversity improvement over transparency with companies that actually do that and reward them for good actions, that's really hard. I think we need to invest a lot thinking in the next coming years, how can we improve the existing EU regulations to really make that happen? I mean, it's good that this regulation is there in the first place, but I don't think these frameworks like the CSRD and the SFDR bring us yet to the point that we need to really move the needle on integrating or trying to at least to put something like a price on biodiversity that is borne by the right entities.
But as you have this experience with private investors, what is your experience? Do people differentiate between climate change and biodiversity in their behavior of investment?
What we see if we look at how investors decide on green aspects is that most end investors, so pension fund beneficiaries, retail investors, or even private impact investors, they have a very fuzzy general view on doing something good. So I don't think that they have, at least that's not what we see in data, say, okay, I have a double weight on climate and on biodiversity, or maybe social is half, or they even differentiate them. They just want to do the right thing, but they really struggle figuring out what that means in an investment context. And that's why we need regulation, like the SFDR and this MiFID II amendment, to help them make the right decisions that help them to translate a general feeling of wanting to contribute into something that actually fulfills that. They need help in that, but it doesn't help to just generate additional complexity and labels that nobody understands.
I would like to come back to a biodiversity prize. Johannes Förster, back in 2019, I guess, a huge report was released by Partha Dasgupta, one of the famous environmental economists, and his advice was just to price every ecosystem service in the world to have, I mean, a real transparency on risks and prices. So is that a good idea, or is it just like a big wish, a good dream?
I think it can be one of the perspectives for sure, because a lot of decision making is happening based on financial information. So then for sure this perspective can add value to decision making, but it's not the only perspective that is important for decision making. So I think that is also critical, that you cannot solve all aspects with economic valuation. So I think thinking in the systems perspective is important to connect also different information, and for sure economic monetary information is one of it. But it's also a diversity of information out there, which you also should take into account, like qualitative information that was mentioned, qualitative risks, is also a way of doing risk assessments. So it's not that one or the other, but it is important to work with as much information we have, and also using monetary valuation where it is useful.
So you wouldn't?
Just to say, I mean, I completely agree with this point, and just on a very top level, I mean, it's super hard to get prices in place. I mean, we don't even manage to put a price on carbon, which is technically a relatively simple thing, right? You know how much oil or gas a certain company produces, but so far we haven't managed to do that at the global scale. So, I mean, I think we're trapped a bit in the situation where we, as mentioned before, some economists say climate change is a boring problem. We know the tools. Of course we know the tools, but we can't get them implemented, right? We're far off where we would need to go. And I think things only get more complicated if we try to price biodiversity. It would be a good approach, but can we make it happen politically and technically?
Well, certain aspects of it you can look at. So, for example, if you compare the ecosystem services from one state of an ecosystem and compare it if it is intact and if it is lost, and what's the difference, and who is benefiting, who is losing, these are kind of aspects you can shed light on, also using monetary valuation. But as I said, it's one part of the decision-making process, and it's not the only part. So I think having this integrative perspective will be also important to solve this puzzle that everything is connected, and we are not. We need to make the system thinking and system perspective integrated into decision-making.
So Dasgupta's idea was, for example, to price the services of the ocean when you ship oil on it or other goods, that should be included into the price of the good that will be sold afterwards. So, I mean, it sounds good, but as you said, it's pretty difficult to measure. So, would that help to do? I mean, to have a better indication on what we're doing?
Yeah, of course. Like if you look at the example of palm oil production, if you do it on tropical peatlands with massive, like you dry the peatlands, you remove the forest, you put in palm oil plantations, and with the goal of producing biofuels or for other uses, and at the same time, by the degradation of that forest and the peatlands, you emitting much more CO2 into the atmosphere than you will ever save by producing biofuels using these palm oil plantations. On the one hand, you could make the same case just looking at the biophysical information, but you need, by integrating these extra emissions into actually the accounting of the benefit of that good, so of the impact accounting basically, if you integrate it into that whole system perspective, you should come to the conclusion that it doesn't make sense to produce biofuels on peatland forests.
Gerrit von Zedlitz, the environmental discussions in Germany, they sometimes suffer from the tininess or neatness of some of the species we're talking about. Like, I just prepared myself for that hermit beetle, which is the Juchtenkäfer. So is that harmful to the discussion about biodiversity, that these species are so tiny?
Well, I think it makes the topic smaller than it is. But I mean, in the end, probably, I mean, what we were discussing before is biodiversity is somehow abstract, and it's difficult to picture what it actually looks like. Maybe at the same time it helps to give it a picture, but I mean, I think we are really should try to make the picture larger and not smaller, so I don't know whether it's really helpful in that regard.
So I can say from my experiences as a journalist writing on sustainable finance that it's much easier to find pictures about biodiversity than anything else I've written about for the last years. So we have 5 minutes left, and maybe that is good for 1 minute statements from everybody, what you would wish for the discussion. Let's start with you. What would be your wish? How could the discussion become better, and how could regulation become more forceful?
I think also looking at the discussion now, this is exactly my wish. I mean, we don't need to put a price on anything. No one will ever take a price at fair value and then make the decision based on a price. It's just an indication. So we don't need to count the species, and we don't need to put a price on it, on nature, on an ecosystem service to act. Like, I think there's enough evidence that you should be doing something, you're dependent on something, it's not good if you destroy it. So this discussion, which might be a little bit of a German one, a very scientific one, if we get it 100% right, then we might start acting, is not the best solution, because we probably don't have that time. So my wish would be, we just start with what we have, and if it's qualitative, that's fine, and that's also what the ESRS are saying, and then we'll see. Can't get worse.
What would be your wish?
I think that everyone here in the room and everywhere else is taking its own role on that, and it's a responsibility, even going for food shopping this evening. I think that's the first start, and then creating the demand from that end, but also in our daily life and the activities of our work we are doing. There's something everyone turn as crew and make some small impacts.
And your wish, please.
Yeah, maybe connected to what Tobias just said. I think we know where we need to go, right? That's not the problem, but how can we solve this common pool problem? How can we make the economy go in this direction that we as a society and as a planet need to go? And I think my wish is that we can have, like, where we are, right? A good combination of clever regulation, using the available political capital we have, as big as it is, then also making use of kind of the market forces, trying to engineer them in a way that leads us there is good. I think we don't have perfect solutions. I think we need to make the best of many imperfect solutions, so limited political will to implement what we should do, kind of some will in the private sector to act, but probably in a mainly profit-driven way that we can use kind of the green demand from investors and from consumers. But my wish would that we find clever regulations and frameworks in the industry to all arrange it as effectively as possible with the resources we have available.
Johannes, first, please.
Yeah, I think I would agree with the previous statements and add on, we need to work in a collaborative spirit, and that we connect the dots, and we connect and engage with supply chains, and and science engages also with corporates, and the image I have shown of the mining industry. I mean, mining is not going away within the next 10, 20 years. No, it's even to increase further. But we have to work together. We have to find solutions together. And also a transition to a more sustainable future has its biodiversity footprint. We are not getting around this, and so we need to find solutions together.
And last but not least.
I agree. However, I think that private incentives are not strong enough to solve that, so I completely am on board with thinking about regulation. However, I think it's important to be broad there because it's a broad topic, and I think information or transparency plays a key role there, either as a policy itself or maybe informing regulators or markets as rather a complement to existing regulation.
So I think it's not the time for resuming because we have a 15 minutes break and we're in the middle of this conference. So I would be happy to see you again after the break. So we're coming to the second part of the discussion, which is called Pathways Towards Implementation and Transformation. And this time we don't have three presentations, but one. And so I think I can already ask all the participants to come to the stage. And we're starting with Ralf Baum. No, he's Ralf Frank, and he's representing Baum, a corporate sustainability initiative. Welcome. We have Christian Heller, the CEO of the Value Balancing Alliance. We have Ralf Lütz, BNP Paribas, and Henrik Leber, who represents the investment fund Akatis, who will have a short presentation to start with. Yes, please. You need a microphone, please.
Wonderful. I love numbers, I want prices, I want values. I'm a financial investor. We run a couple of investment funds, a private company, about 10 billion under management. Let's do a short calculation for us until the presentation is ready. Professor Mosbrugger said 50% of the GDP are the value of biodiversity. Germany has a GDP of 4 billion, then 2 billion would be the biodiversity impact. That is per square meter, €5 per square meter. A forest yields about 6 cents per square meter. Agricultural land about 20 cents, and we talk about a value of €5 per square meter. Now, we can measure the value of biodiversity. How do you do this as an investor to find out what is the biodiversity destruction of my company? And I try to find a lead customer to do the analysis of the biodiversity impact. And we found the company Globetrotter Phoenix, which is a sporting goods company, and they have a warehouse in Ludwigslust in eastern Germany. And then I asked around, Professor Mosbrugger, Professor Tockner, and Professor Bendix helped find the right person. There was a doctoral student in Marburg, and I asked him, can you analyze this for me? And what he did is he took satellite pictures of the ground, of the factory side, of the warehouse side, and then he made the comparisons. He used the vegetation indices, he looked at the water that runs through it, he looked at existing biotopological indications, and then he calculated a value for the ground that we saw. And what he did is he compared the data he got from space with the data that we have from the Kompensationsverordnung, which is a federal valuation of the value, the biological value of land, and calculated the value for the whole ground. And he came up with a value of 3.9 biological points per square meter. And this is a value that you can actually use. That is the biological value of this piece of land, and the building itself had 0.25, so I could simply calculate square meters times 0.25. I could calculate the free area that they had with maybe 4 points per square meter. And in the neighborhood, you could find out how much the Heidelandschaft, heath landscape, was worth, the quarry that is in the neighborhood where trucks drive around and get stones. And so it's actually quite easy to find a preliminary value for what we find in this land. Now, this is not calibrated. It is just a number that we did as an estimate. We don't know how the surrounding areas are. Are they very diverse or not? We don't know how this would look like when we are in Bavaria and not in northern Germany, or near the seaside. So we need to find reference points in the landscape. Typical landscapes, we have to measure on the ground, take the eDNA samples, take the data from above, find out, do we have a good prediction of the quality of the land? And then we can basically do this with a satellite for all over Germany. Very simple. We just need the geographical data, we do the calculation, do a calibration, and then we have it. And if we then combine it with the value of the land, what are you actually doing here? You're destroying something that yields €5 per square meter per year. What is it worth investing in this side? And then you start thinking about trading these instruments. We love to trade. We buy CO2 certificates in our funds. We want to compensate. Why not buy biological points and have them as an asset in your fund? So these are just a few thoughts, I think. Oh well. Give me 1 or 2 minutes to show them. It's not okay. This is the first thing I looked at. It was from the UK. It is called Biodiversity Metric 4.0. It has 30 Excel spreadsheets. You can imagine 30 Excel spreadsheets. Isn't it beautiful? Okay. So these are the 30 Excel spreadsheets. And when I look at these 30 Excel spreadsheets, it's beautiful work, very detailed. It's 4.0. It's a very recent version of this English metric. But I don't know anybody who would fill out this form. So I think this is not useful for real life. Maybe 3 companies, the other 100 is fake, and the rest doesn't do it. So what we measure, we have to measure the air, the ground, the water. So insects, birds, the ground, the soil, the mycelium, the fungi, the lichen, and the groundwater. And we should measure it for the company, for the supplier, and for the customer, top down and bottom up. So this is what Phoenix gave me. It said, measure the biodiversity of this area. This is the warehouse. This is an old stone crushing facility, I believe, and this is free land. And then this person from Marburg, Leander Leist, did all the work that you see here. He did high-resolution images, structure of land use, fragmentation, a digital terrain model, the slope, soil moisture. What else? This is the difference in the vegetation from winter to summer. How much does it add within half a year? The height of the vegetation, how high are the trees compared to the ground? Again, soil moisture and biotope mapping. And then some mapping information like water protection area, legally protected biotopes, near natural forest, parcel boundaries, water flows. And then he combined these different values, matched them against what we know, what is on the ground, and he did a scoring model. Let me see, is it in here? It is here, yes. Again, we see the warehouse, we see the stone crushing facility, free land, and we see a biodiversity value of 3.6, 0.25, 0.25, and this 3.99 here, and the quarry 1.47. So I think it can be done. This is a way how to do it, a very, very, very first step, and I would love to do more work in this, hopefully with Segenberg. That's it.
So I think this is a perfect introduction. I don't know if you can hear me. Now you can hear me. I think it's a perfect introduction to talk about simplicity. And I would like to come from a bird's perspective to the question of simplicity. Christian Heller, we are very close to having a new parliament very soon, with elections first in February, and we're having a new president in the United States. And we have two models of dealing with sustainability issues. The one is the IRA in the United States, the other one is the Green Deal in Europe. The one maybe a little bit more simple, the other one maybe a little bit more complex, and we were discussing about that in the afternoon. So if you were really free in speech,
I would be the president.
what would you say? What is the approach that would lead to more sustainability? Is it the IRA with simplicity, or the Green Deal with so much complexity?
So if I would be a lawyer, I would say it depends. No, but trying to answer your question, I think what we need to recognize is that we are currently in the most fundamental transformation since over 250 years. That means our former growth paradigm, which is all about economic and financial quantitative growth, is obsolete now. And we are starting to recognize this. And we are all currently looking for different solutions, be it in the policy-making space, be it in the measurement space, wherever, to tackle these challenges we are all in. And it's a little bit a competition around the best solutions, which we have been discussing throughout the whole afternoon, which we're discussing in all different areas. I think what becomes rather clear, and we're talking also about sustainable finance today, somehow we need to finance this complete transition. So from somewhere the money needs to come. And now you can think through about different systems. We have the Green Deal, which is more a top-down regulatory system. And we have the Inflation Reduction Act, which is more an innovation boost based on money. I'm representing companies. Companies are looking into market economy, looking into competitiveness and performance. So therefore much closer is the American way of doing and approaching this. Is this sufficient? I think we have heard enough arguments for the time being, and also in the afternoon, that just markets are not sufficient, because markets are not pricing in aspects like externalities. And therefore we somehow need the institutions, talk about taxation or whatever kind of regulation, to internalize externalities. Someone was mentioning CO2 prices. If we would have a CO2 price 30 years ago, globally, we would not talk about climate change in this intensity as we do as of today. So it's both aspects, yeah? So we need investments for innovation, but we also need a certain level of regulation, and here I'm talking really about pricing something in. And pricing something in means corporates and we as consumers need to understand there is a cost for our living, but there's also an opportunity. Yeah? So there are business opportunities to tackle these challenges, and this is what we need to push much further. It will take time. We are discussing all of these solutions. I think we've also heard today we need to take action, so better be imperfect, but get something started, because we have also heard today it's about the now. Yeah? We can't wait, as Bernd mentioned, so we need to get into the action.
Let me add one thing, please. The organization has tried to get more women on the stage, but there were only two. One couldn't come today, so we only saw one woman today, but there were, they tried hard to get more on stage. Maybe next time there's someone in the room who would like to participate in the discussion. And I would like to open the discussion. We have microphones on each side, I guess. And if you have a question, just point with your finger that you would like to ask a question. Ralf Frank, you can also give an answer from a corporate perspective. Would you prefer a more easy approach, a more innovation-related approach, like the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States is?
Let me first say, this is not the only conference on biodiversity. We see there's sort of mushrooming everywhere. And my question to that would be a song title. Now that we found love, what are we going to do with it? No, but seriously, I'm a behavioral economist, so my perspective on, and I spent 20 years of my life at DVFA, that's for some of you that may be a household name, the German Society of Investment Professionals, and in my academic life. And in my professional life, I've looked into investment decision making. And my question very to sort of hone it down is, how do investors actually take decisions using ESG? And you'd be surprised how little they use, which doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Maybe it is the format and the format that we think in terms of regulation, think about the ESRS now, the standards that everyone is so upset about. So many data points, 1,500. My people are my team is in the audience. They would probably know better. Something like 1,500. Forgive me if it's not the right number. 1,500 data points that you need to report, and you just shown some of the EU taxonomy. Is that helpful? Is that the kind of? It feels like a medicine that's not going to help, but it's far too granular, and it doesn't fit the purposes. So I would expect to have something like prices. First of all, and where prices don't help, that's one of the learnings from, that's just a meta study has been published earlier this year about, in terms of ecological behavior, what are the measurements that really make a difference? And sorry to say, people, information is the least likely one. Access is the one. So certain things, I've just learned today that a company, a cement producer is building a new plant in the rainforest somewhere in Java. So that shouldn't be possible anymore. Stop it. So, that's where regulation kicks in. Regulation comes at a later stage, but when it comes, it's the mantra in financial markets, we're over-regulated. It must be possible to ask the question about the quality of regulation. And that's where I see we have a lot of room for improvement. But I would first of all, my hope in investment professionals and on people working at the credit desk is they do understand risk. Sometimes they do not get it right measuring and monetizing risk, but at least if you come with examples for risk, my hope would still be use it in homeopathic doses and, don't overwhelm them with an ESS report that has, 200 pages and is basically what we call in German Datenfriedhof.
But you're representing a network of companies that should
amongst
be
other things,
in the front of the sustainability debate. So is that really the opinion of the companies that you're representing?
Well, the question, it's a fair question from my perspective to ask who's going to use all these ESRS reports and all the taxonomy data. Who's going to use it? So that's a fair question and now I'm representing companies that are saying if there are not a lot of investors around who get the data they need, you just showed what kind of data you would need, and the kind of data that is being offered is taxonomy data, so there's a mismatch there. I think that's a fair standpoint also for companies. Any other than that, the 800 plus companies being represented in Baum, they are very much into sustainability, but in terms of sustainability management, finding other products. And, to be fair, when we look at the ESRS or some of the other regulations, they have produced some change. Some 10 years ago, if you were to visit a company, you would speak to the sustainability manager, someone down the corridor, sometimes even the real function of the company wouldn't know these people. Now you're talking to finance people, risk managers, so the kind of seriousness with which companies tackle that has changed. That is an achievement of some of the parts of regulation, whether we like it or not.
Ralf Lewis, when someone asks me the question that Ralf Frank was just raising, who is it for? Then I always say for banks and insurance companies who would like to know how far their clients have come with sustainability. So aren't you the person that is addressed?
Yes, I'm a big believer in regulation at this point. But honestly, no company will ever be steered and run by measuring 1,200 something data points or KPIs. So in my personal opinion, yes, I do usually read the ESG reports, but I focus on material topics and not on all of these topics.
Give an example, please.
I mean, if there is a company stating that they do not have any impact on materiality, any material impact with regard to biodiversity, I get a little bit critical, because we heard about the dependencies, about the value creation of natural capital, so I think that can't be. So I would dig into this one. If a company says, okay, but we have a big CO2 footprint on scope 1 and 2, but a lesser one on scope 3, I will have a look at those things. But
so you use it very punctual, and you see it, I mean, you compare the data to the text.
I compare data to text, I compare data to industry standards, I compare data to peers, and of course also to our own strategy to see if the client is fitting or will fit with our strategy.
So how many data points, if it's not 1,200, how many data points would be necessary for such a report?
I mean, how many data points do you see in a kind of materiality analysis? I mean, it's usually between some 10, a little bit more, a little bit less. And I think if that are the relevant ones, this could be those data points or those KPIs. According to them, a company will be steered and run. I think that's perfectly fine.
We have to say that BNP Paribas is a French bank, which is, I mean, you can guess from the name, but it's always said that that French banks have a comparative advantage because France started like 3-4 years earlier, directly after the 2015 release of the climate aims, the climate contract. So is that a comparative advantage or not?
I think it is, because we, as an originally French house, started looking early at biodiversity or natural capital topics. Second point, in the French regulation and the French law de vigilance, the companies are obliged to report on biodiversity topics, something that has not been incorporated in the German Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz. So that is probably a little bit pressure from the regulation side. And the next point is that as a bank or as an investor, we look at risks. And we had quite often the comments regarding the nexus between climate and natural capital or biodiversity. But with climate, we can be a little bit selective. So the question of how we tackle the climate issue is more or less determining how we will live. The question how we tackle the biodiversity crisis or natural capital crisis determines if we live, whether we can still survive on that planet. And if we look at the supply chain, and that's more or less the question towards implementation and transformation, and I'm a big believer in pragmatical solutions, I think the bank wants to avoid to invest into stranded assets, be it on the climate side, be it on the natural side. On the other hand, the real economy industries, they should have a look at least a look on their dependencies in the value chain, in supply chain upstream. Maybe that chain is at the edge of breaking. And how do I adapt? And what kind of price could be set?
So Henrik Leber, how often do you read and to what result do you read ESG? How often and to what result do you read ESG reports of companies that you are thinking about investing in?
I don't. No, I have colleagues who are specializing on analyzing this stuff. No, what we did is basically we asked our clients what they actually wanted to do. Are weapons in or out? Is animal testing in or out? Arctic drilling, all these things. And we got about 100 criteria, and we simply try to fulfill the criteria that the clients articulated. We're actually forced to do more than this. Our clients were not interested in tobacco, but if I didn't do it, I would be excluded from many financial intermediaries. They would simply cut me out because I don't fulfill the general standard. It has now degenerated into setting little cross marks. And the field that is interesting, where I mean, we try to really engage, is companies where we have a certain percentage of votes, and then we try to talk about their fields, some deliveries which could be interpreted as military deliveries and so on. But reading those reports, I think it's pretty meaningless. I mean, you get something out of it. I find there's so much greenwashing in there. You know, we have a wild bee park here, and our children play in beautiful flowers. So much greenwashing, which I don't trust at all.
But
so
doesn't that get better with, I mean, the more you have to show metrics, the more you have to be clear on.
And I have a nice tool. I can go through all annual reports. I have a little machine that does it, and it's just talk. In my opinion, maybe I'm exaggerating.
I think that's a good point. First of all, what I hear you say, and that is sort of resonates well with experience. There are ways in which you, as an investor, systematically, periodically, frequently speak to companies. And in this kind of dialogue, that's why you want to have the topic, first of all. So it's not so much about a company reporting, it's about can they speak about it and do they have something to say and are they aware of that? that's at that point I feel that the TCFD, which has been named before, TCFD as the twin to the TNFD, which is going to be launched officially, the consulting group, tomorrow in Berlin. I need to make this kind of effort. I'll see some of you tomorrow in Berlin. This is a framework. When it first was launched, I was thinking this is the future of reporting. Why? Because it asks companies to speak about governance, strategy, risk, and metrics, and not just some metrics, but also targets. And this sort of produces in itself a completely different, it requires a company to go different about it. It is also part of the ESRS standards. They've also implemented that. And that's why I think that where the TNFD has something to add to the party, that is creating the kind of awareness that even CFOs, I mean, that would be if I had you haven't asked that, but if I had a wish that CFOs could speak about this topic, and it would make it then easier. If an investor hears from a CFO about the topic, it has quite a different relevance than reading something that the sustainability department has published.
Yeah, sure, please.
I think of a couple of companies who have terrible metrics, but they develop the solutions to solve some of the problems. We have one investment in a French company which biodegrades plastic, a beautiful fermentation technology, enzymatic technology. And simply because the company isn't running yet, they're still building the plant, the footprint is terrible. You know, just going through the technical numbers, I would be excluded on doing this investment. Just by knowing what they are doing, what they're trying to achieve, it makes sense. And all these regulation tries to find the average model citizen, but you have very specific features. You don't want to have them equally weighted. Some are really important, and there they move something, and this is what counts, and the rest really doesn't count.
But that goes into the materiality that I mentioned. I fully agree that the beehive on the rooftop isn't helping anything at all. But I guess also that the greenwashing risk is going to decrease according to CSRD, because everything you write down has to go through at least a limited assurance for the next years and qualified assurance starting in 2027. So, and if you then have a look at the material topics and compare with the peers, with industry standards, and I think then you pretty much minimize the risk of potential greenwashing.
But let's talk a little bit about your business model, because I think people in the room will understand better how you're acting. There are several different ways to do ESG investment. There's best of class strategies, there's impact investment, there's exclusion. So how do you usually find the candidates for your investment?
I think we implement two approaches. One is backward looking. These are all the compliance reports. You know, what have I done and am I clean and no violations? And what I actually like are the SDGs. You know, what are you trying to achieve? Do I see it in your revenues? How much are you doing for this topic, for this topic? This is what really counts for me. This is relevant. The rest is just, I mean, I'm a good citizen, behaving well, no traffic penalties. The other one is, what do I want to change? And this is the part I like.
Christian Heller, has too much effort being put on being correct in reportings instead of finding ideas to be innovative with the whole sustainability goals.
So first of all, a remark on sustainability reporting and all these frameworks, yeah, including what comes out of Brussels, including what is SBTI, TNFD, TCFD, GRI, IFRS, blah, 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 blah. I'm not sure who knows all of these acronyms, yeah? And even the experts are fully overwhelmed. That gives you an indication where we are. On the other hand, we have something which is called the financial statement. And if you're looking into IFRS, the financial reporting part, we are talking about, at least backed up by ChatGPT, 2,500 pages of standards. 2,500. If you're looking into the ESRSs, it's 1,100 pages of standards. What the financial reporting community has managed is to aggregate all of these different pages on one site. Financial statement. P&L, balance sheet, cash flow. Done. And every analyst is looking at these financial performance and knows after 2 minutes where we are. And we need to get to the same situation when we're talking about sustainability performance. We are by far not there yet. It takes time. We are fighting around concepts and everything, but this should be the aim. And the question is why we are doing this. And here we get to the point, one thing is call it the compliance reporting angle. You need to report about your performance. Yeah? You need to report about do no significant harm, all these aspects. And the other point is, call it in the end the other side of the medal. Put it into context. Where does it fit into your growth strategy? And we need to bring both aspects together. The one is the performance part, the other one is the strategic path forward, the corporate strategy. And this is all what a financial report is about. Yeah?
But you need to make sure not to compare apples with pears there, because if you compare finance has many, many decades under its belt. It started, so I find it a little bit awkward to compare these two, because you have an amalgamation. If you just take the acronym ESG, environmental, social governance, put it into one report, this is different to a monetary value that you have. You have a monetary value in sales, you have a monetary value in cost, so you deduct cost from sales and there you are with your gross margin. Nowhere that I would know of in ESG is it that simple.
Or at least we have a multitude of prices, because you have a different shadow price than I might have.
Yeah. May I intervene? What we have done in our company is we have taken the carbon or the greenhouse gas emissions into, of course, our accounting. We take our share of a company's emissions and buy the certificates that correspond to our share and put them in the fund, and then we give them into a foundation so they disappear. And we had discussions with BaFin. They did a Sonderprüfung on us because they didn't know what we are doing, because it's a foreign instrument. And I said, I'm basically indifferent if the company does the cleaning up of the emissions, if the company removes them, buys them, or if I do it. We are always talking about the same emissions. And there's a monetary value, and you can put it somewhere and price it. And I think we can do the same with biodiversity. It is an asset, basically, that I hold, and I can grow it or I can decrease it. And it can be page 3 of the financial statement then.
But please, let's come back to the emphasis we put on reporting instead of doing other things. When I meet people from sustainability offices within corporates, they often say, we have so much manpower put into this reporting, and you were also referring to that, saying that this comes so fast. So do we do the right things, or is innovation really burdened by doing reporting?
So first of all, I have said, yes, we need quite some time until we get to the simplicity of a financial statement, and will hopefully take not 400 years. It will hopefully take much less, but we need to get the simplicity done. With regard to the question you're asking on regulation, and if it's, let's call it a barrier for innovation, I would argue it depends. So if you're looking now into the CSRD and into the ESRS and the first companies who are really applying it, you get more or less 2 totally different pictures. The one community says, this is such a huge burden, my complete accounting, financial and sustainability accounting teams are only working to get the numbers done, and when I need to talk to the auditors and they have totally different perspectives, we are lost in space and nothing is really happening. There are other companies who say this is the first time where different divisions are sitting together, talking about data, talking about measurement system, and this is changing the whole collaboration within the company. This is changing in the end also assessing different aspects like biodiversity or something else which we have not looked into in this deepness so far, and we're detecting risks, we're detecting opportunities. So it really depends on the company. In general, I would be with your wording, Ralph, saying this is a Datenfriedhof in general. So we need to have I think, smarter regulation. And I think where the corporates, I'm not talking about the data preparers, are overwhelmed is the massive load of regulation, taxonomy, CSDDD, CSRD with ESRS in one go, and not even talking about the sector standards or the industry regulation.
That is probably part of the problem, that it all comes in one go. It was very ambitious. The Green Deal was very, very ambitious. But we should be careful, and I didn't read you as saying that, but we should be careful to call everything as too much of a burden. Last weekend, I was working with my students. I'm a professor at a university in Gismar. I was working with my students who do not have anything to say about sustainability. They're still students, working on a materiality analysis on a company from the south of Germany. And sort of turned then out that, first of all, it is a highly intuitive tool. A double materiality analysis is a wonderful tool if you're working with it, if you don't overdo. And the thing, and that's to give credit to you speaking about financial statements, if you have a financial number like CapEx, it is a wonderful number to find out, is a company going to do, it's a forward-looking statement, is a company going to do what it says it's going to do? So in other words, behavioral integrity. And you can blend these financial numbers into some of the topics that you identify in the double materiality analysis. So, you know, this is sort of through the back door integrated reporting, if you want. At least that's what some 10 years ago was the idea of integrated reporting. So yes, there is something in the financials, and I mean, if you think about BP, Deepwater Horizon, you could tell from the capex that BP had about some 30-40% less capex. So, and then they find themselves in accidents, and it happened before Texas City Refinery and so on. So these numbers speak if you know what to do with them.
Ralf Lutz, the complexity of CSRD is often compared to regulations like Basel III or Solvency II for insurance companies. Is that just a matter of implementation? I mean, a fast implementation of a difficult regulation, or is it? Is it in general too complex?
I think it is too complex. Maybe even the order is wrong. Maybe we shouldn't have started with the EU taxonomy, but put that at the last point, and have started with the CSRD. And in my personal opinion, having started with sector-specific approaches and not with the open wild field, to say, okay, if for the chemical industry that is this standard, so maybe the exercise of identifying the material topics would have been pretty much easier, and have several sector standards, and maybe then at the end of the time have something which is more general. But now we have the CSRD on the table as it is, and we have to live with it. And I wouldn't go for just tick the box for compliance reasons, but try to make something out of it. And I mean, the question was about transformation. And if I do that materiality assessment, the double materiality in the sense of ESRS, I mean, you really get some insights into your own company's business and your weaknesses, and where is the need to transform. Maybe there are some businesses that I could continue running as they are. Maybe some have to be fundamentally changed, and I think that is an opportunity, and both the companies, the real economy, but also investors and banks should make use of that.
So I was talking about different languages prior. I will have this question, but first of all, I would like to ask this question before it disappears. I was talking about different languages of the real economy and economists and banks. How has the culture changed since then? Is there an approach? Can you tell us about the way you are talking to clients about these risks?
I mean, I'm an economist. I do love prices, so I think if I take risk and prices, I have a common ground with the CFOs in the financial department. If I take into consideration the biodiversity or natural capital topics, I have a common ground with the sustainability teams. In my experience over the last 5 years, if there has ever been a gap, that has dramatically narrowed. So I think there is no major misunderstanding. It's not one is talking language A, the other is talking language B, and they would need an interpreter. It's more about some differences, maybe a different way, the different accents, so they're not 100% sure if they're on the same line, but I think it has pretty much not totally aligned, but the gap has narrowed.
So we have a first question, please.
Hello? Okay. Yeah, since you're only talking by yourself there, I thought I'd take the initiative also to activate people in the audience here. I think we all agree that biodiversity, sustainability is a complex topic, a complex issue. The same is also when you buy, if you build an airplane or a cruise ship, right? There are thousands of data points and so forth. But the engineers don't say, this is a Datenfriedhof and I don't care about it, right? So they think that they need each single data point in order to build this airplane or this cruise ship. So I'm a little bit wondering why you, or the financial people, are saying this is too complex in terms of regulations, too many data, we don't want to deal with it, etc., right? So I think you just have to face the problem. You cannot go out of it and say, I only want to have 3 parameters or 3 dimensions and then make my decision. So I think this quest for deregulation in some areas is probably justified, but in this area, it's a complex issue. So just face it and take it and not say, oh, we don't want to have bureaucracy and regulations and so forth, and we want to have an easy life.
No, nobody's, I didn't hear anyone say this, that there was that regulation.
I don't have the right assignment, so I think it's Christian Heller there, the second. He said it's too much regulations and so too many data points, Datenfriedhof and so forth.
The Datenfriedhof, that was me. So to give credit to Christian, it wasn't you. You know, you're not guilty here. I have spent some close to 20 years in training financial analysts. So I don't know a lot in this life, but I know a little bit about financial analysis and investment analysis and the tools you're using and the DCF models and the WACC and the stuff that financial analysts are using typically. In credit research, to make it simple, is not that much different. You're basically looking at a couple of numbers and trying to figure out, is that going to be a good investment in the future? Is it not going to be? What is the risk? And the basic thing that you're dealing with in financial analysis is uncertainty. Because the future is uncertain, it always has been. And so you need to sort of find some sort of ways actually how to price that in. I would agree that sometimes these models are not overall too sophisticated, unless you provide some intelligence and you go on about it in an intelligent manner. But the standard financial analysis with the DCF model as of today has not really made a room for bringing in something as complex as biodiversity. That was all I'm saying. I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, and it will be done, and I'm personally pretty hopeful of used to be called big data or AI, that you have some different tools to crack some of the data and to at least simplify them in a way that you can handle them in the process of investment decision making.
And I think nobody was asking for deregulation, but the question is, how much regulation do we need, and is the regulation that we have in place, or to be put in place, effective in solving the topics we are trying to tackle? And honestly, I'm a user of CSRD and ESRS data, both thumbs up, I do like, but really, do I need 1256 points to analyze? Will the company be run and steered according to those points? No. There are going to be two handful of KPIs that are strategic, and so that is make the regulation more effective.
Maybe just the one thing is, what do we need to regulate and what do we not need to regulate? And I'm fully with you that, let's say, the land use expert in a company needs to have much, much more data than an analyst. Needs to have much, much more data to do his business and his job than the CFO of a company. The question is, do we need to regulate the biodiversity or land use expert or whatever kind of invasive species expert? We were talking about the Juchtenkäfer. Yeah? Do we need a regulation for the Juchtenkäfer? No, we don't need it. And the ESRSs with all the other regulations. So we were mentioning the taxonomy regulation, we were mentioning the CSDDD, have put too much efforts and too much detail. So we need to review what is happening, what is not, and what needs to be regulated. It's not about what data are needed. And the hope what we have, and I'm talking for the corporates, I'm not talking for the financial markets, I'm talking now about the big corporates, is there needs to be some regulation to make performance comparable. The question is really, how much do I need to regulate in detail? And those who are innovative and understand their risks and opportunities before their peers, they should be rewarded. And this does not need to be fully regulated. The question is, and here we're coming back to sustainable finance, who gets better access to capital, to cheaper capital? And we need to invest in those companies who are forward-looking with business models, with better, in the end, compliance systems in the background. But this does not all need to be regulated in all details.
I just want to take your comparison with a cruise ship. Now, when you go on a cruise ship, would you ask for each screw that has been turned and each engine detail? You don't. You just know the engineers have done their job, and now the cruise ship goes at a certain speed, the car goes at a certain mileage, the computer runs at a certain speed. You don't want to know the detail. And that's why I think we should concentrate on the key metrics on a few pages which summarize it for us, and not, as a financial investor, not be involved in every detail. We are not the co-managers, we are the investors.
And there's something, perhaps this is quite suitable at this stage to also mention it. You mentioned the capital inflow, you know, Ursula von der Leyen's man on the moon, and that all these capital flows now into financial markets. If you speak to fund managers, if you speak to asset managers, you will find that regulation sometimes puts a stop to what it is they can do in terms of investments. I'm thinking, for instance, about sustainable infrastructure. It is pretty difficult to actually build a fund product with sustainable infrastructure, not because these investment managers don't know what to do, don't know their job. It's regulation prohibits what they're doing, too risky. It's then counted as an alternative investment. So we cannot just say, on the one hand, that to me is something like the cardinal flaw. Just say, give investors data and then they will act accordingly. I think it has never happened like that.
Please take this first question from the room as an invitation, and we will be disciplined not to have 4 or 5 answers to it then, because I think it was just because it was the introduction to these rooms questions. But I would like to come to this question about raising more private money, because that's so important. Henrik Leber, you do it out of a self-motivation, but we need much more money into the sector from the private segment. So what would you say? How will that inflow?
I don't have a very good answer, but I see many companies emerging which are profitable doing this. And I mentioned in the break a couple of companies, you know, the one that does polyethylene recycling for profit. I see a company that takes landfills and takes the gas out and sells it again. You know, the battery industry now, which sells huge batteries for energy leveling. There are many companies now which are doing this in a profitable way. And if I have a little bit of patience, I can do good and make money with it. And there's enough capital around. I mean, by the way, all the talk about the Schuldenbremse is always the same euro that is being invested. It's just who does it. And the private sector is big enough and would like to do it if the risk can be calculated.
But Christian Heller, as I follow the discussions within the Sustainable Finance Advisory Board, I don't see that this comes from just markets that are open, but there must be a bit more of a financial or incentivized push to private investors.
So I would say the first thing is, yes, certain incentivization via regulation. This is quite true. And this also means that we need to have, call it a stable regulatory system, which is currently in Europe and especially in Germany these days a little bit tricky, to say it like this. On the other hand, we see, yes, private investors, you said it, there's enough capital out there. And from the corporate perspective, I see quite some hope that this capital step by step flows into the right directions. We see that insurance companies are moving quite heavily these days. We see that banks are starting to take much more, call it the ESG or sustainability risks into account. We see that private equities are investing heavily in new innovations, new business model. You just talked a little bit about circular economy models and things like this. So it's starting to move. We are coming back to the question of Bernd. Now, do we have the time? Yeah? So is what we see now coming up fast and coordinated enough in the end to save this planet? Because without this planet, we don't have a society, and without the society, we don't have businesses anymore. So we need to think this through. And therefore, yes, a certain regulation is key, which also allocates finance or financial capital flows into different directions. What is the smartest way? Yeah, hopefully here, the representatives from the financial services have the answers.
Maybe two figures, and it's just about getting to the 1.5 degree pathway, which we already missed, by the way. But according to Deloitte, a research paper they published earlier this year, Germany alone needs investments of roughly 900 billion euros until 2032. Guess what the net investment of the German economy was in 2022? It was roughly 25 billion. So there's a huge gap that has to be filled, and that can't be done by the companies alone. That can't be done simply by the financial market, the capital market. There must be some state support, and there must be some incentive to transform the companies and the business, to allocate capital in those business models.
So does that not show how naive the idea is to sort of say just by a couple of means of regulation we're shifting the trillions into financial markets? Because what you're quite rightly saying is it is something almost like a concerted action. And I mean, still from 25 to 900, Jesus Christ, you know.
But I think 900 was for...
That was over the time frame.
Okay, but still, if you Lieschen Müller, you know, on the back of an envelope, it's roughly speaking is sort of 90 billion a year when you're at 25. That still is a gap. Would you agree?
Sure it is. But what do the companies within the Baum network say? How do they get finance for their ideas?
You know, the German market has never been a market of stock-listed companies, not like the Anglo-Saxon market. The Mittelstandsfirmen that we're ever so keen on, and you will find some of the household names you will find in Baum, they are typically financed through their own cash flow. Family-owned business, financed through their own cash flow. They're keeping the financial markets at bay. Most of them, not even a bond or a Mittelstandsbond or whatever. And so these companies are looking into the profitability of their business model, and you'd be surprised to see how many of them are actually taking sustainability serious, but not so much because they have to. Brussels says, often you have a chain of command, if you want. Large companies, the DAX companies, typically command their suppliers to report on sustainability. So if you do not report on sustainability, if, for instance, you're producing meat for McDonald's, you have to have science-based targets. If you don't want science-based targets, you go sell your meat somewhere else. So that's the rule. So this is typically what you find within Baum, that these companies are doing something. They're at a very, I would say, sophisticated level. And this thing about providing finance, going to the capital markets, this is often, you will find this is a no-brainer for them.
But if these small and mid-sized companies are not the problem, so where's the gap coming from?
I don't say they are not the problem, but if you have a look at credit committees, for example, nowadays you discuss at least as long on sustainability topics as on net debt to EBITDA and other figures. Huh? So it's really the question of, is that business model, has it to be transformed? And if yes, is it transformable, or is that more a fundamental change? And otherwise, if you can't answer those questions as a company, be it a big company, be it a middle-sized company or a small one, if you can't answer those questions, probably your access even to bank loans going to be restricted very, very soon.
And that is a good question to be asked. And in the discussion, I would very much say that this is exactly the way it should be, when in fact, large parts of banks, commercial banks, what they're doing is they're looking into greenhouse gas scope 3, category 15 financed emissions. You want to do that on a credit book? you know, you think you're going crazy, you know what you're doing. You're looking at mom and pop type of shops, the bakery around the corner, which has a credit line. You need to establish a number on the scope 3 emissions, because you will then aggregate them, and that shows the scope 3 emissions in your credit book. You know, this is, I don't know how that translates into English. Someone said the other day, das Erhabene und das Lächerliche liegt so nah beieinander. And that's what.
Please, go on.
Just a little addition, why don't we do accelerated depreciation for tax purposes? If you do some certain types of investments, accelerated depreciation, it's like a tax reduction in a way. Or you give tax credits for biodiversity investments. I mean, these are very simple tools, nobody has talked about them.
Christian Heller, 250 years have been almost the same. Now it's a transformation within 25 years. How does Germany look like in 2050 with respect to biodiversity?
This is really about the crystal ball now. To be honest, I have no clue. But what I see when we are looking into the path forward, I think we need to find solutions, and we have talked about this, that are not too precise. So I have, coming out of the sustainability department, the sustainability colleagues in the corporates are, I would always say in German, too nitty-gritty. We want to get everything too right. And this is, in the end, providing quite some thresholds to get things moving. When I started this work, and I'm from BASF, most of you know this company, when I started to talk to our finance and controlling department, they said, yes, we can tweak more or less every EBIT we want to have, yeah? So black and white. Yeah? So we need to be a little bit more pragmatic with regard to sustainability. You mentioned the work what you are doing with Professor Mosbrugger. There are solutions out there just using satellite data. So you get just a few quite important data points, and you don't need to understand the Juchtenkäfer. Unfortunately, within the companies, there are people who just want to understand the Juchtenkäfer. How do you get this together? Yeah? And there needs to be more top-down push, but we need to focus on the most material things. If double materiality helps out, hopefully. If governments are helping out, hopefully. How Germany looks like in 25 years, I have no clue, because here we also need, and this is what I mean, really serious, take into consideration the global system. So we need to look what is happening now with the new Trump administration coming up. We need to look what is happening in China. In the end, we also need to stay competitive in this region, call it Europe, call it Germany. And then we need to see if biodiversity becomes an asset in everything what we are doing or not.
That is the biggest point that you just mentioned that I dread the most about this topic, that we're running out of time. I have an example about transformation, how long it will take, because we're talking about the transformation of industry. I'm from the Ruhrgebiet, and if I speak German, you would hear that. And 1972 was the time when we had the first big crisis, and that was the decision taken to shut down the coal pits. You know when the last coal pit was closed down? 2018. So here Prosper Haniel in Bottrop. And so it takes some time to transform an industry. And there people did say to me, oh, you know, it was so heavily political, but everything we're talking here about transformation is in essence political. And so transformation takes time.
And it needs time to change the behavior of humans, because I grew up in the same federal state, and even when I did my school, or I finished school, people were still trying to learn something to get into the mining industry, although it was at that point in time clear that there will be an end. So show the opportunities of transformation, show the risk, and take the people with you. Otherwise it won't work.
So you decide, you are organizing this conference, and we have another question, but this will be the last one, I guess.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So Francisco Silvestre, Goethe University, Frankfurt, an ecologist. I would like to ask very specifically, what could people from the business or financial sector or corporate sector expect from biologists in academia? Because I think one definitely good thing of the corporate standards is that bring together sectors that before were separate. And other things are not so good. I'm not sure if biodiversity is the metric, but what could you expect from us now that we are together?
You said biologists, right?
Yep.
Well, I've just been in Hamburg to a conference where a professor of biology was speaking, and it was sort of started as something, oh yeah, we'll hear a little bit about biodiversity. It was like a wake-up call. It was a big bang to most people in the room. Speak to us. Show us the results. Show us your studies, but do not just give us, you know, I'm an academic. I can read academic papers, and I sometimes even do. But, you know, the stuff is, what is the consequence? What is the suggestion, the recommendation, the path we should take? You know, just counting species is one thing, but showing us where would we have to stop? What is the impact that we're having? You know, the ESRS speak about impact materiality, and that means basically the footprint of my company onto the environment. Show us where it is.
BNP Paribas has a foundation. We are sitting next door to Senckenberg, and we have a biologist in our foundation advisory board. And I think science-wise, we do not need much more from biologists. We need more a clear guidance how we can translate the research you do and have done to translate into economic language, into a language that could be understood by corporate deciders. I think the evidence that is shown by biologists and other researchers is very, very clear. But to make it transparent to the outside world of your bubble, I mean, we are in the economist bubble, you are in the biologist bubble, and to make those more transparent and interconnected, I think that is something to show clear cases, cases that can be easily understood and maybe even put into practice in one or the other corporate.
Yes.
In theory, yes.
Maybe an answer from the corporate side. I think getting much close to your answer, Ralph, I usually use the analogy of different languages. And the corporates are used to talk English. This is a monetary language. And there was a person, I think, quite well known here in this group called Professor Christoph Schenk, who mentioned just a few months ago in a larger conference, we need to train the finance people to understand natural, social, and human capital. Vice versa, we need to train the sustainability folks in this world what is a financial statement. And events like this are a starting point to start to understand each other. And what we need to understand from the biologist is, and what you need to understand as a biologist, what this data, what Ralph just mentioned, what does they mean for corporates, what does they mean for business? But it's a two-way process. Corporates need to understand what your research is about, how it affects us, and on the academic side, we need also to enhance our wordings with the corporates or the politicians, whomever you're talking to, understanding this. And the language to the corporates is a different one to Berlin or to Brussels to the politicians. And I think this is the tricky thing about it.
Okay, one last statement, please.
I would love to have more citizen scientists. You know, from the science, we get a test kit, we measure what is in the garden, we see what neophytes are around, we have the bird voices, we send them in, get results and get interested. Because so far the papers are very scientific, bring it closer to the citizens so there's a broader understanding.
So I guess I've learned something this afternoon, that biodiversity has a characteristic, and it is that we can't have a clue how a biodiverse world in 2050 looks like. And this is a difference to the climate change debate, because we can have an imagination of what net zero means. So maybe we need to introduce more and more pictures of what a biodiverse world within the next decades will look like. Thank you very much.
If you allow me to give so basically I was just thanking everyone and also thanking Senckenberg for its hospitality here. I'll take 5 minutes, we're over time, but if you give me 5 minutes, I want to make 5 points about what maybe finance and finance theory can bring to this debate, which was super enriching, but was also quite complex, quite heterogeneous. There was things going a little bit all over the place. So the first thing is that there was this issue about information, and it's also complex. Well, in finance, we have a thing that's called a sufficient statistic, which means that if you want to learn about a certain parameter, and we have to think about what that parameter should be, I'm going to come back to that. If you want to learn what a certain parameter is, if you want to learn about it, then there are certain estimators that are enough. You don't need to know the whole distribution. You don't need to know all 1,500 data points. You need maybe just one or two, right? If you want to know about the mean of a distribution, you look at the sample mean. You don't need to look at the whole distribution. So what does that mean is that how does that sufficient statistic come about? Well, that's the price in financial markets. It can be abstract, that's the efficient market hypothesis. If you let people trade, of course it's very abstract, then the price will be a sufficient statistic for the value of the company. Okay, so that's step one, so it can be reduced. The complexity of the thing can be reduced, and we heard an example about the land use. Because what would be the parameter and the sufficient statistic? We've heard that land is an important parameter. So let's start with that, right? So what do we need to learn if you want to get something about the land as the key parameter? Let's think of putting a value to land, and this we've heard that this has been done. Now, the problem now is what are our preferences, right? The price is the right estimator of value, but we also heard about the externality, that if you let people trade in their own devices, they might not contribute to the common good. Well, economists have an answer to that. That's pigou taxation. What's the problem with that? So you would say that the price has to be equal to the true social marginal cost. Well, what is the true social marginal cost? And that's where the scientists come in. Because it could be, people have ridiculed this Juchtenkäfer, but it could be that there is this one or two species that are critical that if we by accident demolish them, the whole system breaks down. So what we need from the scientists is this true social cost. For climate, for global warming, we know it, but it's very imprecise. The first estimates from 15 years ago were like $100 per ton CO2. Now it's more like 200, 250 because science is evolving. Okay, so that's what the scientists can give you. They can give us their best estimate of a social cost. Now I come to the problem of what's biodiversity different from climate change. I'm not a scientist, but I think there's two things that are possibly different. The first one is alluded to. I think biodiversity has probably more acute tipping points that climate change has. Climate change, we've just abandoned 1.5 degrees. That's okay, so we just move to 2.5 and maybe we move to 4, right? It seems continuous on that scale. I'm not so sure, but it seems within a range the process is continuous. Not so sure about biodiversity. Right? I mean, what are the key species that we should not at all exterminate? Maybe there are several points of no return. We don't know about that. That's why we need more science. The other difference, and this came up in this no growth thing. Take the analogy of climate change and CO2 pricing. What do we want to achieve? We want that a company finds it so expensive not to install the right filters or produce brown that it changes to green. Okay. If we think that land is important for biodiversity and we put a price on land, we need to compensate people for letting the land sit idle. Now that is a problem because idle land will not be productive. I think that's a fundamental problem that not people have thought about it, is that with climate change we're talking about the transformation of society or the technological process. With biodiversity, it's not clear what we're transforming it into. Are we transforming it into idleness? Then we may have a problem with this growth objective. And then I want to just finish with two quick things. This issue of simplicity again. You know, I've mentioned the sophisticated statistic, but we have a lot of economic theory that talks about robust control or Knightian uncertainty. So for example, a simple portfolio optimization problem, in theory, you know exactly how much weights to put on each of the thousands assets that are out there. Nobody does that, because for that, you would have to invert a 1,000 by 1,000 matrix, which is very, very difficult. So what do people do? They just say, okay, I have 1,000, I put 1,000 in each asset. We know that this is good enough, because that's a robust way of investing when you don't know the parameters, or the parameters are too complex to estimate. So there's a lot of guidance from Knightian uncertainty, from robust control, about what are the benefits of being simple relative to the costs of not being complex. Okay, and the last point I want to do is, because there was a lot of debate about regulation disclosure, Here I have to say I'm a bit pessimistic because in our institute we have sort of the classic financial markets DNA, and if there's one thing that we've studied, that's bank regulation, okay? So we know bank regulation, it can do good things, but we also know about the dangers. So what do we know? We know that the regulation, simple regulation works best. A leverage ratio. You just take a bank's assets over its liabilities. That's just two numbers. What does Basel regulation do? It wants risk weights for every single thing and complex here and that, and we stress test the whole thing, and it's a mess. Because banks will avoid it, right? I mean, we know right now in the last financial stability report, it looks like banks have a lot of equity relative to the risks that they're doing. But if you actually look at the difference between the leverage ratio, what would be the simple measure, and the complex measure, there's a huge divergence. So what this means is that banks will optimize and find the ways around. So the more complex the regulation, the more doors you leave open to regulatory arbitrage. And so what's my bottom point, and with this I will finish. I think that when scientists from various areas, from finance, from economics, from biology, talk to each other, I think we speak the language of facts and of logic, and I think we have the tools around everywhere. We just need to combine them to A, convince people that the need is there, it's pressing, and we have solutions, and then, okay, the one thing about the political will, well, we have to see, maybe we need the next time to also bring in the political scientists to know exactly which buttons we need to push on the political agenda to get it going. But thanks a lot. I think I learned a lot, and I wish you good rest discussions tonight. Thank you.